This is your 20-minute podcast where we do our best to give you useful information in 20 minutes or less. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/your 20-minute podcast. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Now, here's your host, David Brower.
Thanks, Alan. Hi, this is David Brower with your 20-minute podcast, and our special guest today is Carl David, the writer, author of Bader Field, How My Family Survived Suicide. A suicide can tear a family apart, as a lot of us know. Art dealer Carl David, fourth in a line of a four-generation family, owned an art gallery. And in the book, you recount the death of your father, Sam, and the suicide of your brother, Bruce, in Bader Field. Welcome, Carl. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? And thank you for having me on your show today.
You are very welcome. Before we get into the meat of the book, tell me about Bader Field. Where does that title come from?
Well, Bader Field was a small airfield outside of Atlantic City, and my dad, who was also a pilot as well as an avid art dealer, had his own airplane, and we used to fly in and out of there all the time. And that was actually the last place I saw him, so it felt appropriate at that point to name the book Bader Field. Not that anybody who's not from the area would know specifically what that was unless you knew, because you would think that, it could be an airfield, baseball field.
Sure.
What is it? So,
well, it's in and of itself. It's an intriguing title, and it makes you want to pick up the book and go, what is that about?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's very good. So when you wrote this book, it started as a memoir, an homage to your dad, and then it became a much more important work, right?
That's correct. I did want to memorialize my dad. My kids weren't born yet, and I needed to let them know, that he was my hero and how incredible a human being he was. He was my mentor, and he was pretty much everything. And it was a terrible loss. I was 23. He was only 58, and rocked my world again.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other huge piece of this book, of course, is your brother.
Right. Yeah, I lost Bruce to suicide when I was 16. He was 22, and just that also just altered my existence very rapidly and for a long, long time.
That's two huge giant. Not to minimize it, but it is two huge giant losses in what, a 7-year period?
Yeah, pretty much. I think my dad lived 8 years after my brother took his life.
Yeah. My gosh. And suicide, it seems, at least in my part of the world here in Colorado, it seems to be getting more and more attention as people talk more and more about prevention and talk about, ways to be alert to different signs and those kinds of things. Have you found that as you've promoted your book around the country that it's becoming a higher awareness?
Yes, I have. And when this happened in 1965, people didn't talk about it. It was an act that had this negative stigma about it, that everyone who did something like that was judged. And you can't do that. You can't judge someone for doing something like that. It's an act of desperation. And over the years, it's become more and more out there in the daylight. And thank God people are talking about it, because the only way to thwart this thing is to raise awareness to it, and then hopefully you save a life. You given the inspiration of someone to choose to live instead of dying, and because they know they're not alone, and they're help for them.
No question about it. And it is. My wife deals with a lot of new moms and newborn babies on Medicaid. She goes door to door and takes care of them and checks them and resources for them and all that kind of stuff. And so she has a score book, if you will, to where when she checks in with those moms to kind of evaluate where they might be on a potential of suicide. It's become quite scientific in some ways, I guess, to help detect that kind of thing.
It has. I mean, there are benchmark signs that are obvious and others that are not, that have been quantified and are paid more attention to today. I mean, even something as subtle as someone just kind of dropping out of society and becoming reclusive.
Yeah.
And with babies, when a woman has a baby, sometimes they go through postpartum depression, and there's all these other factors that come into play that in the old days, decades ago, people really, if they recognized it, didn't know what to do.
That's right. There was no awareness. There was no education. There was you're being selfish. Those kinds of very detrimental comments to people that would even put other people farther back in the room from letting things out. Right.
Right.
Tell me about did your family have any kind of clue about your brother's state of emotional torment? I mean, it was back in the day when it wasn't that aware. What kind of things did you find out before or after his death?
Literally nothing. There was no sign, no foretelling of this coming in any way, shape, or form. Afterward, there was no note. We were just completely blindsided.
Yeah.
And it's been a question mark ever since. And even if we knew the answer, it wouldn't bring him back. But had we been able to see something unusual or out of character beforehand, we were a pretty open family, and we talked about a lot of things. But obviously there was something that was within him that he couldn't share or didn't want to share, or just was in so much psychological pain for whatever reason that he kept it inside.
Yeah.
So we saw nothing.
Wow. Goodness, that just leaves you speechless. And to have, sometimes people think back when they deal with suicide, and it's, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But then when you have no clue at all, you're just kind of left out there, aren't you?
You really are. You're left dangling in space. And I am certain that my father bore responsibility for not seeing something, even though there was nothing to see. And I think that's what killed him 8 years later. He just couldn't really survive it, and ultimately succumbed to it. I mean, he did get back to life, and eventually the smiles came back, and there was some semblance of the old days. But,
right.
It's just the damage was done.
Yeah. So your dad, he died of a heart attack?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he had a massive coronary over in England on a business trip.
Wow. So how did the rest of your family, do you have siblings, your mom?
Yes. My mom was still alive after that. She lived to be 94, thank God. And
Wow.
I have an older brother, Alan, who's 9 years my senior. And we just kind of all pulled together as best we could. I mean, this was uncharted territory for us. We didn't have a clue what to do, how to handle this, or even understand the reality of it, because it was such a foreign commodity to us.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just like us. I mean, we were like the all-American family. We didn't have a dog, but we had a station wagon, and there were 3 kids. So,
and you had the picket fence, right?
Yeah. Well, no, we didn't have a fence either. I think we had a railing.
There you go. There you go.
But we were a happy family. We traveled together. We did things together, and that's why this was such an abominable shock.
I can only imagine how cathartic writing this book must have been. Did your siblings and your mom help to contribute to this book, or did you share things with them as you wrote along? How did the writing process work?
Well, it took a long time because it was an arduous task that was cathartic, but it was painful at the same time. And
Sure.
there were times that I would put the book down for 6 months at a time, or even a year, and say, I can't do this. And my wife, God bless her, would always tell me, if it's too difficult, don't do it. And she was my rock, and still is. And I said, no, you know what? I have to do this. It's within me. I want this for my kids, for our kids when we have them. Well, at that point, we'd already had kids, but I really needed to memorialize now, not just my dad, but my brother as well, and tell my story. And as cathartic as it was for me, I began to realize that, hey, you know what? I really need to reach out with this book, and maybe I can save somebody else's life, by sharing my experience and showing what the wrath of hell, if you will, exists, and that's left on the surviving family and friends.
Absolutely right. I know I live in a small county, Larimer County in Colorado, and our suicides have doubled in the last 10 years, from 36 to 83. So we're like 25% now out of 100,000, which is
wow,
a pretty significant percentage when you look at states and other cities around the country. And so that's why, in fact, even my church, held a study, a public open study and conversation about suicide a couple of weeks ago, because it is just so darn prevalent, and you don't see it coming 99 times out of 100.
No, you really don't. I'm sorry to hear that. You could have. That's quite a percentage. That's huge. Did you say Littleton? County?
It's Larimer County, and so I live in
County.
I live in Loveland, Colorado, just north of Denver.
Okay, because I had a friend who was John Denver's pilot, who came out of Littleton, California. Littleton, Colorado.
Colorado, yeah.
Yeah, he actually flew me out of there one day.
And John's
whole
plane?
other story. John Denver's pilot. Yeah.
How fun!
So it was kind of cool.
Absolutely. So now that you've had, how long's the book been out? I guess.
It got initially published at the end of '08.
Okay.
And it's POD, so it's print on demand. So it's alive and it stays that way, which is great.
Oh, that's awesome. So how is the feedback been from, I guess, people who maybe have been contemplating suicide, families who have lost family members to suicide? What kind of, you've got to be touching some lives on this deal in the last 9 years.
I have, and I'm not sure how many or who or where, but I have had people email me or call me after doing a radio show or a television show or a journal interview, thanking me for sharing, and how much it's helped them, and whether they were considering it or they had someone in their family, because it's just as much for us as survivors a tool to cope, to know that we do survive, but we can't do it on our own. It really requires an enormous amount of professional help.
Absolutely. I rarely share this, but I came close to that 5 years ago this month, actually. And my son had left an unloaded gun in our living room, fortunately unloaded. And so I went to that place for a couple of minutes and fortunately pulled back from it, but I immediately told my wife about it. We got counseling, which helped tremendously. We put me on some depression meds, which changed my life. But to get that close and have a sense, only a sense, of what could have happened to my family just made me cry.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that you had second thoughts and didn't do it. There's a narrow window of 10 minutes that these crisis counselors that I've spoken with have said if they can talk to somebody for 10 minutes, they can generally talk them off the ledge.
Yep.
Not always, but generally you can. There's that one little window where you can let people know that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and that they're not alone. And as overwhelming as the world seems at that time, that there is help and there's tomorrow. So it's, God bless you for hanging in there.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a huge way for you and your family to pay it forward, right?
Exactly. I mean, I'm taking the darkest days of my life and doing something to help someone else with them by sharing and showing it. It's tough because it brings it right back.
Exactly. Yeah, and I can only imagine when people reach out to you about your book, or you overhear people talking about your book, I would sense that it has to put you on some kind of a roller coaster a bit.
It does. And, it's a good thing, even though it's painful, knowing that it's doing something good for somebody else, whether they're a survivor or they're contemplating taking their life, or they did and they didn't do it. And, so it's a manifold expression of paying it forward. I mean, I live my life that way. And, it's a real strong passion for me. I mean, I'm an art dealer by trade. I love what I do. I also work a lot with the military organizations. I'm a member at the Union League Club over here in Philadelphia, and I'm on the Armed Services Council, the Veterans Club, and the American Legion Post.
Nice.
And there's a big suicide problem, as you're, I'm sure, aware, within the military and among veterans.
22 veterans a day.
22 a day, yeah, that we know of.
That we know of. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I mean, there are 1 million people a year worldwide take their life, and again, those are the ones that get reported There are other instances that may have been a suicide that nobody knows about. And
Right.
the scary thing is that the amount of attempts is 20 times greater than the successes. I mean, thank God
Oh,
the
my
success
God.
rate's lower, but
Right,
it's a
yeah.
scary number.
So did you serve?
I did not, so I'm doing it now.
Good for you. Good for you. I just attended a retreat over the weekend. It's called Songwriting for Soldiers. And it's an organization out of New York and out of Austin, Texas, really, that puts together 4 of the world's best songwriters at any given time. They get with no more than a dozen vets, and over a day and a half, these vets are able to, in a safe environment, share their deepest, darkest demons and turn it into music.
Wow.
And my God, it was a life changer. It was just so powerful. And one of the young ladies, the event started on November 17th, and she had just literally tried to commit suicide on November 17th 3 years ago.
Wow. Wow.
And so her song was about that experience. And I'm going, Tara, if you don't get that song out there in some way, shape, or form, you're going to save a life or 2 or 5,000 or whatever, and your book's exactly the same. There's so many opportunities for people to be touched and motivated and driven to gather more information, more education, hopefully speak closer to their family members, maybe even be closer than they've ever talked to them before.
Yeah, it's sure a possibility. I mean, I have 2 goals for this book. I mean, aside from saving lives, I am going to work to get this into the school systems all over the country, which is a humongous effort, but I'm not going to quit. And the other
Good.
one is to have a film made, because I think as a visual society, it would have a lot of impact on younger kids who don't read.
Oh my gosh, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, I wish you the best of luck on both those, because either one or both of those would certainly touch some lives. How can people reach out to you to learn more about your book, get a copy of your book, those kinds of things?
Well, the book is available everywhere online in 60 different digital markets. You can get it through Amazon, you can get it through the iBook store, the Apple iBook store, and Kindle and everything. If you just Google Bader Field by Carl David, you don't even need the whole title. That'll bring it up.
Okay.
My website's down at the moment. It's carledavid.com. It's CarleDavid.com. But it's being rebuilt, so it's been down for a while. It got hacked, so I have to redo the whole thing.
Yeah.
And
Bader
my email
is Bader, right?
You're right, correct. Bader. Bader Field by Carl David.
Well, it's
and
just
my email is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to say my email is carledavid@gmail.com. So my ears are always open. If anybody needs help, wants to talk, needs a suggestion, I'm always available.
How generous, man. Well, God bless you and your family, and continued success touching people with this book. And I especially wish you every success in getting this into the schools. I mean, that could be a transformational thing for our country,
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And God bless you as well for all that you're doing and for saving your own life. I'm proud of you.
All right, brother. Thank you. Our guest, Carl David, the book Bader Field, How My Family Survived Suicide, and we'll hope you'll check it out. Check it out on any place where you can find books. Just Google it, even Bader Field, Carl David. You'll find it. And Carl's email again is carledavid@gmail.com, right?
Right.
All right, man. Best of luck to you. Thanks again for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Until next time, don't forget to download your free audiobook at audibletrial.com/your 20-minute podcast. That's audibletrial.com/your 20-minute podcast for your free audiobook. And thanks for listening to Your 20-Minute Podcast with David Brower.